Hello everybody, welcome back to Carrie's Corner. We are getting to the end of the Pushcart War by Jean Merrill, illustrated by Ronnie Silbert. We're on chapter 31, The Sneak Attack. By the time the battered but jubilant 3rd Division arrived at Maxie's shop, Mayor Cudd had begun the desperate sneak attack that was intended to wipe out the whole Pushcart army at one blow. The 3rd Division arrived at Maxie's to find their friends from the 1st and 2nd Divisions listening in shocked disbelief to a radio announcement by the mayor. Mayor Cudd was announcing that he had suspended all pushcart licenses until further notice. An army is an army, Mayor Cudd was saying, whether it calls itself a peace army or some other kind of army. And it is my view that the pushcart peddlers in organizing an army have violated the truce. They have provoked violence and bad feeling, said Mayor Cudd, not to mention the disruption of traffic on 3 streets of our city and the destruction of public property. "What are you talking about, you crazy Cudd?" shouted General Anna, seizing Maxie Hammerman's portable radio and shaking it in terrible anger. "I am talking, of course, about the destruction of a fire hydrant on Green Street," Mayor Cudd's voice continued. "A hydrant was destroyed?" Maxie asked, as he had not heard all the details of Mac's attack on the Peace Army. "By a truck, of course," said Morris the florist. "The usual smashing." "The fire commissioner is extremely upset," Mayor Cudd went on. "Water is flooding Green Street, and he has had 5 men there for an hour trying to seal off the water main." "The fire commissioner is upset," Anna screamed at the radio. "That is the worst thing that has happened today." And she would have thrown the radio on the floor if Maxie Hammerman had not taken it firmly out of her hands and led her gently to a chair. "And I am disturbed too," the mayor proceeded. "Therefore, I am not only temporarily suspending all pushcart licenses, but I am also recommending to the City Council when it meets next week that these licenses be permanently revoked." The peddlers stared blankly at the radio as the mayor went on to express his sympathy to Mac's family and to all truck drivers who had been inconvenienced by the Peace March. The mayor expressed regret at Mac's arrest and said that he would do everything he could to see that he was released promptly. Meantime, the mayor said he trusted that the citizens of the city appreciated the courage of this great driver standing up to his traffic rights when he was so pitifully outnumbered. "Think of it," said the mayor. "One truck driver against hundreds of pushcarts." As for the promises extracted from the truckers by the 1st and 2nd Divisions, the mayor said Mr. Mammoth had already assured him that he and Mr. Livergreen and Mr. Sweet had no intention of meeting with Maxie Hammerman. These law-abiding men, the mayor explained, could hardly be expected to honor a promise made as a truce of a peace march that was a clear violation of a sacred truce. At this point, Mr. Jerusalem rose and without a word picked up one of Maxie's hammers and smashed the radio to bits. The rest of the peddlers were too stunned to even discuss the incredible turn of events. Maxie urged everyone to return home as quietly and quickly as possible and to get his cart off the street, for the mayor's action had put them all in danger of arrest at any moment. There is the smashing of the radio. As Mr. Jerusalem had no place to put his cart but on the street, Maxie insisted that he spend the night at the Hammerman's shop. It was the first time in 70 years that Mr. Jerusalem had slept indoors, and it made him feel like an old man. Chapter 32, Frank the Flower's Crocheted Target. The 3 left Mayor Cudd's headquarters on the night of the Peace March, confident that the Pushcart War was as good as won. The mayor's broadcast, they felt sure, would break the back of any further resistance on the part of the pushcart peddlers. In fact, the 3 left Mayor Cudd's to map their plans for Operation Krushkar, the code name for the automobile offensive that was scheduled as the 2nd stage of the Lima Master Plan. The 3 could hardly have foreseen at this point the possible significance of a slight psychological victory that Frank the Flower was to score over Albert P. Mack during the time the latter was held prisoner. But the resulting damage to Mack's morale and to their own when they heard it may have had a critical effect on the events of the next few weeks. On being arrested, Mack had been locked in a cell directly across from Frank the Flower's. This in itself had enraged Mack. When he was glad to see that Frank the Flower was still in jail, it angered him that Frank should have the similar pleasure of seeing him in jail. From the moment he was locked up, Mack had been throwing temper tantrums, kicking at the walls of the cell, bellowing into the corridor, insulting the guards, and in general making a nuisance of himself. When the police commissioner was summoned to see what the guards were complaining about, Mack kicked him in the shins. The police commissioner decided that Mack was definitely a criminal type. And when Mayor Cudd, as he had promised, personally requested that Mac be released, the police commissioner refused. Mayor Cudd maintained that as he had declared the peace march illegal, the police commissioner had no legal grounds for holding Mac for reckless driving. The police commissioner replied that reckless driving was the least of it, as there were now more serious charges against Mac. The owner of the cafeteria that Mac had driven into claimed that whether Mac was guilty of driving recklessly or not, he was guilty of trespassing on private property, and he refused to withdraw his charges. "He is also guilty of kicking a police officer," said the police commissioner, "and I refuse to withdraw my charges." It was clear that the police commissioner was acting on principle. Mac was not a prisoner anyone would have kept around for the fun of it, and his disposition did not improve with confinement. The fact that Frank the Flower did not seem to mind too much being in jail added to Mac's bad humor. Frank was now used to the place, of course, and he was used to the place, and he received many letters and postcards from his friends among the pushcart peddlers, as well as from hundreds of Frank the Flower fans. Morris the florist wrote Frank every day and sent him fresh flowers twice a week. Maxie Hammerman sent him all the latest reports on how the war was going, and General Anna had promised him that he would be made a general too as soon as he got out of jail. None of Frank's friends had told him, they didn't like to worry him, about the mayor's threat to end the war by revoking the pushcart licenses. So Frank the Flower was under the impression that the pushcarts were still winning the war. Naturally, he did not believe anything Mac told him to the contrary. Frank the Flower's general cheerfulness and his conviction that the pushcarts were winning were bound to be annoying to Mac, but what drove him wild was Frank the Flower's dartboard. An old lady whom Frank had never met, but who had read about him in the papers, had crocheted for Frank a large pink and green dartboard running in circles around the bullseye. Frank's friend had crocheted 20 trucks, complete with tires, and she had included with the dartboard a generous supply of darts which she had fashioned from darning needles. She had apologized for the darning needles. "You would probably prefer pea-tacks," she had written Frank, "but as you know, tacks are very expensive just now." She wrote Frank at the time of the tax. Frank the Flower had hung the dartboard on the side of his cell, and each morning after he had finished reading his mail, he would practice shooting down trucks. Frank's ambition, if he ever got back into action, was to be able to justify his reputation as an ace shot. It embarrassed him that all his fans believed him to be a better shot than he was. Whenever the prison guards came past Frank's cell, they would call out, "How are you doing, Frank?" And Frank the Flower would report, "Got 17 out of 20 last time. That's 116 so far today." Sometimes the guards even came into Frank's cell and had a go at the dartboard themselves. Frank the Flower was popular with the guards, who preferred crackpots to criminal types, and they called his cell the shooting gallery. After Mac was arrested, the guards took to calling the truck in the center of the target the Mighty Mammoth. There was much cheering from Frank's cell every time someone hit the Mighty Mammoth, and medals in the form of flowers from Frank's hat band were given out for every bullseye scored. Mac could tell from the number of daisies or bachelor buttons a guard had pinned to his uniform how many Mighty Mammoths he had hit. When Mac heard Frank the Flower and the guards laughing and calling out their scores, he would throw his dinner plate into the corridor and demand to be given a quieter cell. At such times, one of the guards would go across the hall and tell Mac to lower his voice as he was disturbing the customers in the shooting gallery. At night, when there were no guards around, Mac would call threateningly across the hall to Frank. "You just wait," he'd say. "Just wait. This war is as good as over, and when it is..." But he did not succeed in worrying Frank the Flower at all. Frank took the very fact of Mac still being in jail as a sign that things were going very well, indeed, for the pushcarts. After a week of Frank the Flower's optimism, Mac's own confidence cracked. A guard found him one morning crouched under the bunk, writing a desperate letter to the three, begging them to surrender. "An old lady is supplying them with ammunition," Mac wrote, "and thousands of officers are in training, and they will not stop until every Mighty Mammoth is extinct." The guards confiscated the letter and gave it to the police commissioner. The police commissioner laughed and said, "Mail it to Mo Mammoth, special delivery." The next chapter, we'll get a little ways into this, is chapter 33, The Turning Point, The War of Words. Frank the Flower's faith, unfortunately, could not be shared by any of the pushcart peddlers who knew the facts. Things had never looked worse for the peddlers. From the time the mayor had threatened to revoke the pushcart licenses, most of them had given up hope. Even Maxie Hammerman, though he was now famous and on a magazine cover as the Pushcart King of America and the brains behind the Pushcart conspiracy, was very glum. "A great kind of king to be when soon there'll be no pushcarts," Maxie said privately to his friends. "Who's giving up?" said General Anna. "So now we must fight the city council." "City councils you can't fight," Max said somberly. "They meet in private. You don't meet them on the streets." "Until now," Maxie explained, "the pushcarts had a lawful right to be on the streets and we could fight for our rights. But if the city council makes a law against pushcarts, then we have no rights to fight for. If we fight, we are against the law." The whole city seemed to accept the fact that the Pushcart War was over. A newspaper ran a story called "The Death of the Pushcarts." However, there was to be one more battle, and it was to be provoked by a picture, the photograph Marvin Seeley had taken months before of Mac hitting Morris the floors the first time. Everyone was curious at this point to know just how the war had begun, and this prompted Emily Whizzer to show her husband, Buddy Whizzer, Marvin's honorable mention picture in her scrapbook. Buddy, as we know, blew up Marvin's picture to get a clearer view of the situation, and as the facts he discovered by enlarging the picture had human interest, he decided to publish the picture on the front page of his newspaper. Buddy Whizzer was as surprised as anyone else at what happened next. Buddy thought of himself as a hard-working editor putting together a few facts. He had no idea of the chain reaction that would be set off by the Seeley picture. And that's where we're going to stop today. Stay tuned to find out what the Seeley picture did. Have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye-bye.